All right, good afternoon and welcome to K-12 Education Budget. Before we proceed and have our bill hearing, I want to go over tomorrow's bill hearing. It's the Parents' Bill of Rights. We had quite a few individuals that wanted to provide testimony, so I divided it equally among proponents for 30 minutes and opponents for 30 minutes, and did have to cut off at 14 for opponents, and that only gives 2 minutes for each of those individuals on opponents. Then they will be given 10 minutes of questions to those individuals, just as the proponents will too. So I wanted to be sure and let everyone know that as well. Committee, today we are going to hold a hearing on House Bill 2690, and before I open the hearing, I'd invite Nick, our reviser, to go ahead and provide an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Committee, in front of you, as always, you have a bill brief for House Bill 2690, and you can follow that or the bill along as I'm speaking on it. So what this bill would do is it would generally establish 2 state programs that would be intended to focus on the academic achievement of students. So the bill first would establish the Every Child Can Read Act, which focuses on 3rd grade literacy initiatives, and then also the Legislative Award for Excellence in Teaching, which would provide schools that make certain student achievement gains with money to provide merit-based bonuses to teachers that are teaching in those schools. The bill finally would require the KSDE to prepare an annual summary report of certain student academic achievement outcomes, both to the governor and to the legislature. So in my bill brief, I run through kind of section by section. So in section 1 of the bill, I'll just touch on that. This generally provides a statement of legislative intent regarding the promotion of academic achievement in schools and the legislature's intention to focus on that academic achievement within schools. New section 2 of the bill would enact the Every Child Can Read Act to promote that 3rd grade literacy initiative. The section would require the Board of Education of each school district to provide opportunities for students to participate in targeted educational interventions and literacy for those students. At the 3rd grade level would be required to be attained through the science of reading, evidence-based reading instruction, and necessary competencies to attain that proficiency. The school districts would be required to follow and use the framework of KSDE's Dyslexia Handbook, and each school district would be required to ensure that the competencies are achieved through literacy instruction in phonics, vocabulary development, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. So under this act, each school district would be required to measure student achievement through state assessments and then through other universal screening tools that are approved by the local board or by KSDE. Schools would be required to provide targeted and tiered interventions that are designed to match a student's individual needs through additional contact hours with the student, which may include one-on-one instruction, small group instruction, tutoring, or summer school. Additionally, school districts would be required to ensure that each 3rd grade teacher communicates certain information to the parents of 3rd grade students at least once each semester regarding that student's individual deficiencies and any recommended interventions for the students. So this teacher-to-parent communication must provide the parent with a summary of the Every Child Can Read Act and the goals of the act, the student's assessment data that pertains to literacy for that student, the recommended interventions for that student, and then how the school district tracks the outcomes of those interventions. Finally, with this act, the bill would require that each school district has to annually report information regarding the school's implementation of the Every Child Can Read Act to KSDE, including the interventions and outcomes that are used in the school and attained in the school, the number of 3rd grade students that are in the district, the screening and the assessment data that that district is using to evaluate student progress, and the percentage of all the students and the student subgroups who are proficient and moving towards proficiency or deficient in those literacy initiatives. The next major part of the bill is in sections 3 through 11. This these sections would establish the Legislative Award for Excellence in Teaching program. And again, this program would provide an opportunity for teachers to earn merit-based bonuses for their performance in schools. The KSDE would be the primary administrator of the program, and the program would commence in school year 2025-2026, when schools could begin to submit applications for these bonus awards. This program would generally authorize the amount that schools would have received under the high-density at-risk weighting to be able to receive that monies for the purposes of the award. So the program, as we'll talk about here in a sec, would determine the amount that schools would receive after that high-density at-risk weighting actually expires, and would take that money. The state board would determine how much school districts in whole would have gotten under that weighting if it still existed, would put that money into a fund, a demand transfer from the SGF, State General Fund, and then that money into that fund would be used to distribute these awards. So the schools would be similar to those that are provided the high-density at-risk weighting. It would provide any school that is 35% or more at-risk students or free lunch students within that school to be eligible to receive this award. The program would be generally divided amongst two different grade level groupings. So eligible schools that teach kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 3, that block, could receive an award to provide those merit-based bonuses. And then also schools that teach grades 4 through 12 would be eligible to receive awards under the program. So that's the eligibility criteria for a school. General eligibility criteria, 35% at risk, and those grade level groupings. An eligible school also would have to receive, or would be able to receive, an award if the school demonstrates improvement in certain student academic achievement outcomes. So once a school initially qualifies for an award, by demonstrating of those academic achievement outcomes, the school would then be eligible to continue to earn a partial award amount for continued demonstrations of certain academic achievement outcomes. And we'll get into that here in section 6 and 7 of the bill. So section 6 of the bill deals with the kindergarten through 3rd grade pot of monies, I will say. So under this academic performance criteria for these grade levels, an eligible school that teaches those grade levels can receive a full legislative award for excellence in teaching if the school demonstrates one of the following performance criteria. And you can see those in section 6 or in my memo. One of the following, so first, the school could demonstrate annual academic progress on the statewide English language arts assessment over the preceding 4 school years. So what the school has to demonstrate is that it moved all the students or one of the reportable student subgroups into a higher performance level on those state assessments. And that has to show a 5% performance level gain for all students or a subgroup of students. The school could also demonstrate evidence of annual academic progress over that same preceding 4-year period from a literacy screening assessment selected by the local board and also approved by KSDE as an appropriate tool to use to evaluate the annual academic progress in literacy. And again, that school must show a gain of 5% of all students or 5% of a student subgroup over that 4-year period, achieving a higher performance level. And then finally, the school, to qualify for a full award, could demonstrate evidence of annual academic progress over the 4 school years from a statewide literacy screening assessment that is developed by the State Board of Education to evaluate annual academic progress in literacy. And again, the 5% gains apply to that. And then finally, if a school is a high-performing school, it could qualify to receive an award, not by showing those gains, but by showing that the school is maintaining high academic achievement amongst all students or the students of a subgroup over the preceding 4 school years. And if that school shows that it is maintaining a 90% proficiency on state assessments over that measured period of time, it could qualify for the full award. Partial awards could be awarded after a school has qualified for this first award. A school could qualify with those 5% gains it doesn't prohibit them from continuing to qualify and get a full award there, but schools could receive a partial award for continued performance after they initially qualify under those first gains. So under this provision, schools would have to show 1% gains on any of those assessments, that they're maintaining those continued academic achievement and getting a 1% gain for those students, all students or a student subgroup, over the next set of years that they have since they last reported for a receipt of the award. So those would be for the ELA assessment, the school-based literacy assessment, or an assessment that's approved by the State Board of Education. There's a provision in the bill that would authorize, there's some schools in the K through 3 grade levels that may not have a third grade within that school building. So if a school would be reporting achievement data from the English Language Arts Assessment, that's only begins in third grade. So those K through 2 schools would not otherwise be able to participate in this program, but there's a provision in the bill that would authorize the KSDE to provide awards to eligible schools who meet the 35% criteria of at-risk students, even if that school does not teach a specific grade level that is reported for purposes of the award. Under this type of provision, or under this provision in the bill, a school district could combine schools for the purposes of this award, and there would have to be some sufficient nexus in that combination of schools, such as the schools send or matriculate a significant number of those second grade students onto that third grade level at another school district that might have shown these performance gains. So this provision would authorize other schools that aren't necessarily reporting that data to still qualify for the award and provide those teachers bonuses in that school. The next achievement outcomes apply for grades 4 through 12. And for a full award, it's similar. The school has to demonstrate an assessment-based demonstration, and then also has to demonstrate one of another criteria. So first, a school that teaches grades 4 through 12 would have to demonstrate that they are achieving annual academic progress on the ELA assessment and the math assessment over those preceding 4 school years. And the school has to show those performance gains of 5% for all students, or 5% of the students in a student subgroup moving to a higher performance level on the assessments. Otherwise, the school could show that it's maintaining at 90% proficiency on assessments over those school years, and it could qualify under that. So it has to meet one of those criteria. The other criteria that the school has to meet if it's teaching grades 4 through 12 is one of these following. So annual academic progress on the ACT or pre-ACT college exam over those preceding 4 school years. Evidence of annual increases to the number of technical certificates awarded to students over the preceding 4 school years. Evidence of annual increases to the number of students who completed and passed advanced placement courses over those school years. Evidence of annual increases to the number of students who completed and passed with a grade C or better any dual or concurrent enrollment courses, or evidence of annual increases to students' participation in extracurricular activities, combined with annual increases to the grade point average of students participating in those extracurricular activities. And for this extracurricular activity qualification piece, the school has to demonstrate that the school increased extracurricular activity participation by 5% amongst all students, or 5% in a student subgroup over the preceding 4 years, combined with that grade point average increase for that reported group. That would be for a full award. So with regard to a partial award or a secondary qualification, one of these grades 4 through 12 schools, if they've previously received an award and met the above criteria, the school could receive this partial award by meeting one of those items. So the first item, they have to show that they're moving 1% of all students, or 1% of the students in a subgroup, to a higher performance level on statewide assessments, the ELA and math assessments, over the period of time that they last reported information for the program. And then they have to also demonstrate one additional performance criteria, being the ACT performance, increased annual academic performance, annual increases to the number of technical certificates, advanced placement courses, the pass rates, evidence of annual increases to the number of students who completed dual or concurrent enrollment courses, and then also the extracurricular activity items. So the assessment criteria and one of those other items. In order to receive one of these awards, after if you're going to demonstrate the evidence of academic progress, the school would also be required to have a teacher appraisal process in place in order to receive this award. So this teacher appraisal process must be open to all licensed teachers of an eligible school, and the appraisal process must be exclusively based on teacher performance standards that evaluate whether this teacher exemplifies and promotes excellence in academic achievement through creative, consistent, and meaningful ways, inspires and maintains high academic achievement standards and expectations through thoughtful and relevant lessons and instruction, and encourages and models attitudes and behaviors to promote academic success and well-being. The principal at each eligible school would be the person who is designated to oversee the teacher appraisal process, and would be the person who determines what teachers are deserving of an award in the school. Any teacher, again, would be authorized to apply for an award with that school principal to receive a merit-based bonus award. And again, only the principal would be authorized to make that final determination of the teachers that qualify. If a selected teacher's school qualifies for a full legislative award for excellence in teaching, that teacher is designated and selected by the principal pursuant to that criteria would receive a merit-based bonus of $5,000. And then if a selected teacher's school qualifies for a partial legislative award for excellence in teaching, that teacher would receive a merit-based bonus of $2,500, so half that amount. The teachers within a school would be authorized to receive an award, but it would be subject to the maximum allocation of award monies that is authorized within the fund for that eligible school as determined by KSDE. So for funding purposes, again, I alluded to this previously, this would commence in school year 25-26 after that, a couple of years after the expiration of the high density at-risk weighting, and that would build up the fund that is created under this bill. And so on a biennial basis, the KSDE would be required to authorize school districts to apply for the legislative award for excellence in teaching, and legislative awards for excellence in teaching would be released following that year in which schools submitted their applications for receipt of an award. And the KSDE would be the one to oversee that the eligible school has met those requirements for receipt of an award. So Section 10 of the bill establishes the legislative award for excellence in teaching fund. And again, as I said, it's in the state treasury, and it's designed to make awards to schools for this purpose. And beginning in fiscal year 2025, so a year before the program, the schools can start submitting applications. This fund would receive monies from a demand transfer from the state general fund based on that amount determined for the high density at-risk weighting for all schools as if that weighting still existed. That amount would go into the fund that first year, and then would go into that fund that next year as well. And that pot of monies would be available in the fund and be authorized for the purpose of providing awards pursuant to the program. So during each of those biennial cycles, the KSDE would be required to make half of that total pot of money available to both grade levels that are provided for in the bill. So K through 3 performance criteria, and then also the 4 through 12. So the KSDE would divide that amount by half, and that would be the allowable amount for both of those grade levels. The KSDE would be required to determine the maximum allocation that each school could receive as if every single school district that is eligible qualified for the award. This maximum allocation would apply in that year and would be based upon the total enrollment of the school if that school were to qualify for the award. And if monies were not awarded, they would remain in that fund until awarded or until legislative action does something different with that. Schools under the bill would only be allowed to use those monies for the purpose of making that award to teachers and providing those merit-based bonuses to teachers. And if they don't make those merit-based bonus payments or have any excess amount of money provided, they would have to return that money into the fund to be used again for this purpose. For reports, the KSDE would be required to provide information on the Legislative Award for Excellence in Teaching program through a website link on their website. They would be required to provide general program information, how schools can apply for the awards, the schools that have previously received the awards, the number of teachers that applied, and the number of teachers who qualified, the amount of award monies provided to each eligible school, and the achievement criteria demonstrated by the school to receive the award. I will note again, I said subgroups. There is a provision in there that says that for a subgroup to qualify using a subgroup, the school, it would have to be a reportable amount of the subgroup such that that subgroup could be reported as aggregate data and not produce any personally identifiable data for that subgroup. Finally, Section 12 of the bill would amend current law, KSA 725178, and this would require KSDE to prepare and submit to the governor and the legislature a summary report regarding student achievement in the state. This written summary report would be required to provide a statewide summary of the performance, accountability, and longitudinal achievement reports that are prepared pursuant to that statute by KSDE, and it would be required to include achievement results from the ELA and math assessments over the preceding 5 years for all students and student subgroups to show whether there are statewide trends in academic achievement or learning loss, a comparison to any other evaluation metric used by the State Board of Education, such as college and career readiness or graduation rates, a comparison to other educational assessments such as NAEP, an analysis of the trends in student achievement and a review of conditions that are impacting the outcomes, a review of the academic interventions that school districts are using to improve student performance, and whether the state board has any recommendations regarding interventions and the estimated achievement gains to be expected from those interventions, and a summary of the performance levels and the scale and cut scores for the statewide assessments and how those are to be interpreted and used. This written report would also be required to provide a student-focused longitudinal achievement report that provides the achievement gains or losses that are occurring for certain student cohort groups. So this report would begin with the students who are entering in school year 22-23, entering the 3rd grade and the 8th grade in that school year, and would follow those students for 3 years. The KSDE would be required to repeat this 3-year increment every 3 years and kind of grab those students again every 3 years and follow those students along. So this longitudinal report would be required to include a summary of the improvement or learning losses that is occurring within those cohort groups, an analysis of the evaluations and the metrics that are used to measure the year-over-year achievement of those student cohort groups, a review of the academic interventions that school districts are using to improve those cohort group performance, and whether there's any recommendations for interventions to improve achievement and the expected gains. And then also the achievement results for those cohorts from the ELA and math assessments, and then any other assessment data that those might be applicable to those students, such as NAEP, ACT, and pre-ACT for such student cohort groups. And Madam Chair, I would be happy to try to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Nick. A very comprehensive bill that deals with achievement, reading literacy, and merit pay for at-risk, high-density schools that qualify. So questions, yes, Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, as we're talking about the merit pay and looking at these student assessments, are we talking about teachers being evaluated based upon cohort groups, or is it grade level to grade level testing?
So the teacher evaluation process, the school is qualifying for under the performance gains at the school. So that's kind of a little broader. The teacher evaluation process is evaluating teachers based on those criteria that I listed generally, most likely, there's going to be some evaluation of the students within the classroom, but it's mainly whether the teacher exemplifies and promotes excellence in academic achievement and inspires and maintains that high academic achievement, and then encourages and models attitudes and behaviors to promote that academic success. So that teacher performance criteria is a little separate maybe from the academic performance gains that the school has to show at the school level.
Okay, thank you. And on the academic gains at the school level, are we doing a pre-assessment followed by a post-assessment of the same cohort so we can see what the gains actually are? Or are we looking at grade level to grade level?
This would be, I mean, if the school is qualifying and showing 5% gains on the ELA assessment, that would be not necessarily the cohort level, that would be the following class level improving. So if a third grade class took when they take that ELA assessment in 1 year, and then the next year the third grade class would take that assessment again, and then you would look at the gains under that.
So we're not actually seeing the gains of the individual student, we're just looking at the trend overall within the school.
Yeah, and there might be some wiggle room there. I mean, there's the provisions where a school could establish its own literacy screening assessment and show performance gains amongst students. So there could be a class, maybe a cohort level screening tool used by those districts to show those performance gains, or also if KSDE does, or the state board establishes some screening tool to be used on a statewide level between the grades of, let's say, 1 through 3. This bill doesn't necessarily only keep it to that class-to-class level. They could probably show those gains amongst that cohort group.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, when you say the students who have completed and passed advanced placement courses, does that mean that they've taken the exam and received the college credit for it, or just passed the class in the public school?
Let me look at the specific language of that real fast, just to make sure. So yeah, it's just, right now it's just completed and passed. So you're showing annual increases to the number of students who have completed and passed those advanced placement courses. So if they're passing them and you're showing gains in the passage rates, that would be one criteria you could use to qualify as a grades 4 through 12 district, or school, excuse me.
So you have advanced placement in grade 4?
No, well, this is more general. No, I don't think grade 4, I'm not aware of any advanced placement courses in grade 4. So this would apply just like extracurricular activities. I don't think many fourth graders, I'm trying to think of whether there's any extracurricular activity programs in the fourth grade, but some of these criteria, for example, like you are seeing, the advanced placement courses, extracurricular activities would apply to those upper grade levels, to those schools, high schools that are, and middle schools. And the grades that are, like schools that have the grades 4 through 6 maybe would have to show some different criteria to qualify.
Okay, so is it identified any place in this bill for those lower grades? Is it described? Did I miss it? We can find it later. How about that?
So
Effort to
it's
save time.
described for grades K through 3.
I don't think so either. Okay, in effort to save time, we can come back to that. Thank you.
Yeah, that might be something that the committee needs to think about a little bit, I think.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Nick, correct me if I'm tracking straight. So school decides to participate in this, and then they're required to set up the teacher appraisal process? Is that my understanding?
Yes, I think the bill contemplates that appraisal process being established when the school decides that it's going to be participating in this program.
And then just on the surface, it appears to me like that could have a negative consequence for a teacher that maybe wasn't appraising as high as their peer teachers. Is there any protections in there from having that appraisal negatively impact the occupation of a teacher?
No, the bill doesn't specify that this is to be used to evaluate the teacher's overall teaching performance. This is an appraisal process for this program. I presume schools could use it in certain ways, but this appraisal process is specific to this program, and schools, if they want to participate in this program, would have to be a part of this, or doing an appraisal process for their teachers like this.
And then as a class goes from, say second to third grade, is there any account for the class size or the number of students that have an IEP within that age group as it transfers, up to a grade level?
No, not under the bill, no.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
However, there are subgroups that could be identified. And if a subgroup was, for example, those that had an IEP, that might be an acceptable subgroup, and you could look at 5% improvement with that subgroup. So that's just, thinking off the cuff with that. And in terms of the Excellence Award, the Legislative Excellence Award, it's, again, I agree with our revisor, it's not meant to be an evaluative tool for anything other than a bonus. So it's a competitive bonus for excellence in teaching based on outcomes of that school. Any other questions? Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in reference to the teacher bonus system, is there an appeal process? If a teacher says, I want to do this, and they don't get rated as they feel like they should, another teacher does receive this, is there some way they can come back and say, prove to me how I didn't qualify for this?
Not specifically provided in the bill. There's not an appeal process specific in the bill. But schools might have some leeway to structure their own policies. I mean, this is requiring school districts to establish this process based on these three criteria. So schools would be structuring their own policies kind of within the confines of this bill. So there might be a way for schools to structure an appeal process in there as well.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Nick? Okay, thank you for the overview. All right, committee, with that, we're going to go ahead and, I will go ahead and open House Bill 2690, establishing the Legislative Award for Excellence in Teacher Program to provide merit-based bonuses to teachers in certain school districts, establishing the Every Child Can Read Act to focus on third grade literacy, proficiency, and requiring the State Department of Education to provide summary academic achievement reports. To note, there is a fiscal note that has been provided to you online, so make sure you take an opportunity to take a look at that. With the opening of the hearing, we do have a proponent section. We have written testimony from James Franco, president of Kansas Policy Institute. It was also sent to you online and is found on the website. There is no neutral testimony. Is there anyone in the audience that was overlooked for proponent or neutral testimony? All right, committee, we will move on to opponent testimony, and we have Mark Tallman with the only opponent testimony that's oral today, so welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. When I began working on this testimony, I kind of expected there'd be a larger crowd, and I tried very much to focus on a few pieces of the bill, and I will try to be brief in talking to you about that. I've also been given advice from a member of the committee to try to be positive when I can, and I want to indicate, although I don't mention it in our written testimony, I've not heard any objection that the bill has been circulated to the concepts of the first part, the Every Child Can Read Act. Again, we very much agree with those goals, and I think some of those things are contained in our policies. Would also commend the development of the bill in the criteria that would be used for these bonuses, going beyond just state assessments to other multiple measures. We've always been concerned about that, and I think I would want to acknowledge that. The reason we're here appearing as an opponent is primarily what we see as the effect on high-density at-risk weighting and what that could mean for school districts. And so I can talk about that for a moment, the bottom of my testimony, and give you a little history of how at-risk density came about, that particular weighting. After the Montoy School Finance decision, the legislature commissioned legislative post-audit to do a comprehensive cost study to tell the legislature what, in their expert opinion and their study of the literature, would be required both to meet outcomes and inputs to get the academic results the state was asking for. I know that's a mouthful, but the idea was to say, so how much should the base budget be? What weighting should there be? One of the things they found was the kind of well-established idea that poverty is an important factor. They recommended an at-risk weighting factor of 0.84, which was more than double the weighting factor at the time. But they also said that they found, they believed, and their research told them that there are even greater needs for students in concentrations of poverty. And they recommended what I believe is referred to as an urban at-risk weighting or an urban density weighting that they recommended would be set at 0.726 on top of the 4.84 that they had recommended, and that would have cost about $50 million back in 2006. The legislature adopted most of the recommendations and most of the money from the post-audit study, but they made a very significant change in at-risk weighting. They significantly broadened the number of schools that could qualify, but they didn't change the amount of money. And that the result right now, that weighting, instead of being 0.726, is 0.105, only about a seventh of what post-audit said would be necessary to help kids in those concentrated poverty areas do well. And of course, as you know, that factor is applied to a base state aid per pupil, which was fully implemented at about $4,400 in 2009, declined compared to inflation, well, declined in real terms pretty much through the time when you adopted the new school finance system under Gannon that has begun to increase that further. So over much of the period of time of the high density weighting, the value of that weighting as measured by base state aid was actually declining. Therefore, we don't think it's terribly surprising that we're still not getting the results we all want out of that area. So as we understand the way the bill works, and again, I certainly hope to be corrected if we didn't fully understand this, is that that weighting is due to expire now June 30th, 2024, at the end of that school year. And under this bill, that next year, those districts currently receiving about $50 million would no longer receive that amount. That pool of money would go into a fund which the following year could be available for these bonuses. That means that under any circumstance, there is a one-year period, as we understand the bill, where approximately $50 million in funding would be not available for any purpose, a break year if you want to look at it that way. And there's two things we think are important about that loss. First of all, the loss per district would not be equal. Because at least as I tried to do the math Saturday afternoon and took every district's amount of at-risk weighting they receive and divided it by their enrollment, 8 districts would lose over $300 per pupil, 27 districts would lose between $200 and $300, 31 districts between $100 and $200, 20 districts between $50 and $100, 60 would really lose $1 to $50, and 120 districts wouldn't lose anything because they don't receive any at-risk funding. So remember, under this plan, that loss would not affect everyone equally, and the districts with the highest percentage of low-income kids would have the biggest loss. The second thing to keep in mind is what those funds are currently used for. Primarily two things. One is the type of targeted interventions that the first part of the bill says districts should be doing for the Every Child Reads Act. In other words, it identifies targeted and tiers intervention and gives examples. That's one of the main things that high-density weighting and all at-risk weighting is used for. The second thing that high-density weighting can be used for is to supplement teachers based on the population of low-income kids that they serve or at-risk kids that they serve. Obviously, then, the current at-risk dollars are more heavily concentrated the higher degree of poverty you would have. So our concern is, at best for that 1 year, those dollars would be taken away from those districts, with the districts with the highest concentration of low-income students losing the most. Now then, in the following year, those schools, those teachers could get a bonus. But at least as I understand the bill, they would be getting a bonus based on improvement in performance, most of which they had achieved when they were receiving high-density weighting to support those programs, and then a 1-year period in which those dollars would be taken away. And more to the point, again, at least as I understand the bill, the available bonuses would be distributed on a total enrollment basis, not a at-risk or low-income basis, and therefore those districts on the 35% poverty end of the scale would be eligible for a higher pool of bonuses than those districts at the 90% poverty end of the scale. At least that's how I interpret the way the bill works now. So, and I will try to wrap up very quickly. I would just note when we look at the issue of at-risk students, the bill seems to suggest, and certainly arguments have been made, that one of the most important things we need to do through teacher bonuses would be to motivate teachers. So this bill, in effect, pool of dollars would be taken away that then could be returned only for the purpose of teacher bonuses. But I think the question would be, if the answer to better student performance is just better teachers or better teaching, why is low performance so disproportionately focused on lower income families and schools with high percentage of these kids? And it seems to us because these kids bring so many other factors to school that teaching alone cannot overcome. Teaching is a critical part of it. Having the best teachers, having motivation, better pedagogy is critically important, but it's not the only intervention. And the concern we have about this bill is it replaces a pool of money that can be used for a variety of purposes, and replaces that with only one type of intervention. Last thing I guess I would note is, and because in my testimony I kind of went through the 4 purposes of the bill, we don't think this bill would actually achieve those. One of those goals is to provide teachers in such schools with a way to earn bonuses on their performance. We would note teachers already have that option through their negotiated agreement with the board if that's something that the teachers and the board wants to pursue. Currently, compensation is a mandatorily negotiable step under state law. This bill doesn't really speak to the idea, but I guess implies that these would in effect be state bonuses outside of that process. So I guess I would say we are not necessarily against the idea of bonuses, although that's not something our members have brought forward. The legislature could do that with a new pool of money. Our concern is that this is funded with a pool of money that is already being used and committed in important ways. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you, Mark. And we will now take questions for Mr. Tallman. All right, well, I have some. Okay. Question number 1, do you happen to know off the top of your head the percentage of the entire budget of high-density at-risk weighting? And don't worry, it's not like you don't have to. It's not, I don't.
No, I do not.
Okay, no worries, because who would just have that number at the top of their head? But I just pulled this up. It's actually, so if we're talking about the previous year, $47.9 million out of $5.179 billion, We're talking about 0.9%, less than 1% of the budget that we're talking about. Money that was approved by the Kansas Supreme Court with a sunset attached to it. And my question relating to that, you gave us some information that districts would lose over $300 per pupil for 27 districts, and then you gave us a whole list of what they potentially could lose. So if teachers receive this money and we see increased outcomes, isn't that a good thing? They wouldn't need the $300. Because I guess my question then is not very clear. The money isn't going directly into the school. If we maintain this money directly in the school, do you foresee increases of 5% in outcomes without it? Because that's what teachers would have to do in order to receive it. They would have to see a 5% increase of proficiency. If you can tell me that we should expect that anyway, then maybe this isn't needed.
Well, Madam Chair, we certainly hope, and I will say I expect that we will see increases, whether you've picked the right amount. I mean, I don't know whether the idea of that 5% over, I think, a 4-year period or 3 or 4, I don't know how realistic that is. I've actually tried to look at some data from some other states to try to get a sense of maybe what they may be seeing. As I think I've shared with the committee before in other testimony, there have been periods of time in our state history where we would note funding has been increasing, where test scores on state assessments have been rising. And it is our belief, our hope, that that will happen. And I guess what I'm saying is, and this is my only point, if it does happen, as this bill would suggest, it would happen at a time when those at-risk dollars are available, except for 1 year. And the other, Madam Chair, if I may, I don't want to filibuster in it with an answer, but the other side of it is, so when we talk about that, say, $300 a pupil, which would be at the high end, I guess we'll come back to saying is, so where do those dollars go now? They go to either targeted interventions or they are already being spent to supplement teacher salaries. So the concern, I guess we're saying is, if you take those dollars away, then that teacher may be able to get a bonus, but there would be fewer aides or assistants or one-on-one or summer school programs, because that's part of where that comes from. And then I guess the final point, I don't know whether this was clearly the intent of the bill or not, is certainly a concern would be that the money comes out based on how much poverty you have, but it's made available on an equal enrollment basis. So if I'm understanding that correctly, that means that the districts that would lose the most, under the best of circumstances, could not recap what they lost.
Okay, thank you, Mark. But when we're looking at gains and losses, the money is there to drive achievement. And if the money that we're using is not driving achievement upward, it's lost. And we know from the legislative post audit several years ago, it didn't deal with high density exclusively at all. It was just at-risk funding. And we know that from that sampling of the audit that 70% of all funds were used for regular classroom teacher, not interventions above and beyond. That's what 30% was. And so knowing that, that's problematic. To me, it seems like we can't just keep doing the same thing that we've always done, and we can't not expect achievement gains, and we can't not incentivize or reward achievement gains. So my question to you would be, what do you think incentivize schools to increase proficiency?
I think, number one, I don't know a school board that isn't concerned about getting gains. I don't know of teachers that don't want to do that. I don't think it's a lack of incentive. I think it is in part, over time, we may not have had the degree of focus that we should. I think to some extent, We've had some lack of clarity over what the common goal should be. And again, as I've said, and I just have to I apologize for keep saying it. In our view, in our state's history, as resources were increasing, districts were using those resources to improve educational outcomes. Over an 8-year period when resources were declining, achievement measures fell. We had essentially a year and 3 quarters of new funding to try to see improvement after new funding happened before the COVID pandemic hit. So I guess I just would respectfully say, in our view, the resources you're providing with the desire to improve that everyone has, and I hope stronger. I think it's one of the reasons we keep embracing Kansans Can, because it talks about raising not just test scores as part of academic achievement, but a wide range of things that we hope schools will do better. So that, you're right, we cannot expect to get different results by doing the same thing. I completely agree with you on that.
And just 2 more points on it. I'm looking at testimony that said that there, in a recent meta-analysis over 40 merit pay studies, the authors, including one from Kansas State University, found a positive and significant relationship of performance pay on student learning outcomes. And then it actually said individualized incentives are more effective than group incentives, and larger incentives work better than small ones. Would you like to comment?
Not knowing any of the details, I guess part of my question would simply be, do those studies take into account a situation where the dollars for a merit system were in effect new dollars or a reallocation of dollars? Because I think, again, a great deal of our concern here is this is really just reallocating dollars currently available for a set of programs for a single type of intervention.
Okay, so sorry again. Another question related to that. So then, if we were successful, this happened, we saw schools increase by 5%, which, by the way, I'm going to mention where we are right now academically, achievement-wise. Would that be a good reallocation?
It would be a good result, but the point I would make is, in the first year of this program, as I understand it, the 5% that you would be seeing, I guess the question would be, would that 5% have occurred because those teachers knew we may be able to get a bonus, or would that have occurred because there would be 4 years of increasing funding under Gannon helping to support a variety of programs as we come out, hopefully, of the pandemic? That respectfully would be my only point. It would be very difficult, it seems to me, to determine what would be, how to allocate the reasons for that increase if it occurred.
Well, Mark, you and I have talked about increases, and we've talked about that we have provided, if you look at all funds, 138% increase in the last, I think it was, Gabby might have to help me. It was a sheet we received last year or at the interim committee meeting. It was either maybe 10, maybe more years than that. 138%. We can double check, but it was a spreadsheet that we passed out in the interim, and it was a spreadsheet that everybody has had in this committee last year. And so increases have steadily been made over a long period of time with a few years of declines. And so we have not, in that entire time span of funding that has exceeded inflation. So no matter what we may argue about where the money went and how it was used, it did exceed inflation overall. And so my point is we have yet to see in that time period a 5% gain. And so to consider that it possibly would be because we've had high density at risk weighting of 0.9% of the total funding would be an interesting conclusion. I want to end and then open up if there's anybody that thought of a question while I was asking all of these. I wanted to end with where we are right now and why we're having this discussion. And yes, I actually think that was I appreciate your comments about we are just not looking at state assessment. We expanded it to other ways to measure kids, including the universal screeners for K through 3, and recognizing the dyslexia task force and what they are trying to do with the science of reading. So we used all of that good work in there. But let's look at the kids that are at risk. So I'm going to use the free and reduced lunch since 2017. So we're talking about 5 years. The percentage of students that are at highest proficiency of this group, level 4, is 3.13%. The next group is 18%. So we have proficiency in our kids that are probably in the highest at-risk group of just over 21%. And so that is over a course of 5 years, and it actually hasn't gotten better, it has gotten worse. And we have added more money in. And I could also give you data over all students, or I could pick any subgroup, and it's bleak. And so if KSDE, or if the state board, or if KASB wants to tell us that you can increase 5%, you can do these things, and just give us the 0.9% funding that we are suggesting should be reallocated to teachers to inspire, because we believe teachers are the most critical variable in a child's education once they walk in the door. The teacher. If you can tell me that, then that's a really strong testimony. But if you can't, then I don't know if you're suggesting we should just do status quo.
Well, to be clear, we are not suggesting you should do status quo. I think the difference is simply a different set of approaches. Again, I always respectfully enjoy talking with you in the committee, Madam Chair. I think another thing to keep in mind is if at the end of this period of time, we have not seen those 5% increases anywhere in most districts, does that mean the fact that teachers knew that the performance bonuses would be available means that the bonuses don't work?
Yeah, I would say if this were a successful program, meaning it actually were passed into legislation and we saw no growth, then it would not be a successful program. And it didn't incentivize teachers to make a change, or it didn't incentivize any growth. So I'm actually a fan of cutting out programs that don't work and doing the same old thing if it doesn't work. But currently, we're providing a lot of money, and we're increasing money, and it's high density money, and there were requirements to report high density money, and at some point they were supposed to show those reports and but we never really saw that. So this is a way to say, teachers, we appreciate the teachers, and we are going to give those that are doing the very best an opportunity for excellence awards, which, that's not everyone. It's just it's truly what the word says, or the title says. It's excellence grants. I'll just be quiet now. Representative Byers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, I don't know if you can answer this question for me or not, but when we're looking at a specific building that's highly density on these issues, is it possible for there to be classes within that group that either overrepresent or underrepresent the demographics of the entire building?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, let's say you've got a school that has the high density students there, and then you've got 3 different teachers in the room, or in 3rd grade. Is there a teacher that can have an overrepresentation of the overall demographics, while another teacher might have an underrepresentation? And so basically you have some teachers that are teaching those high density kids, other teachers that may not have as many?
I would say that would certainly be possible. Again, one of the challenges, I think, is that if you have a building with very high poverty, we certainly have schools with 90–95% of students low income. That's probably going to be very uniform. On the other hand, that may not be true as others. I guess it would simply be a question of how that building allocated students among the teachers. It would be possible. I don't know how likely that would be.
So any ideas of how we could equalize that if we're going to a merit-based pay system for teachers?
Well, one of the challenges, it seemed to me, about a merit-based system is just that. So how do you recognize the individual teacher? Seems to be, as I understand, the idea behind this bill is basically say we're going to look at building achievement makes you eligible, and then kind of bring it down to a level of saying it would be up to the principal then to actually decide. Honestly, I hope this does not seem an insult to principals or a compliment or whatever. I would think that most principals, knowing there's a pool of money available for that building because they qualified, they would probably want as many of those teachers as possible to get that. I mean, so I would say there would be a tendency, I would think, to share this as widely as possible, because it would be, I mean, let's face it, this is an important bonus that people will appreciate. So I would tend to think it would be more likely to maximize the number of teachers getting it rather than minimize. Now, the other thing, I don't know whether anyone has tried to do any sense, is to, I guess you could conceivably try to look at how much money would be available, let's just say in the best of all possible worlds, every district qualified. You know, how does the maximum amount of dollars compare on a run through the per pupil to determine how many awards could be available at the maximum? I did not try to do that, but I suppose you could.
And I would say if we're going to do that, that's a salary. That's not an excellence award. And Representative Byers, your question, if you had a really high density school or a teacher, the couple things to think about. Number one, it's just 5% improvement. So you could start out at 0 and show 5% improvement and you could still qualify. You don't have to get into proficiency. It's moving towards proficiency, and hopefully eventually everybody does. The other thing is in your school, you qualify as a school. Or in the case where you don't have a third grade, those feeder schools could partner or pair with it. And so then they too would be able to do it. And that principal could say, look, I know you're a former band teacher. They could say that band teacher inspired, they helped kids to get excited and ready to go learn English language arts. That teacher deserves it. So it doesn't say, there's no quality criteria for the individual teacher to have their kids get all A's. That is not part of it. So I just wanted to clarify some of the things that we're having a conversation about. And I do think there are a lot of moving parts, and I appreciate the comments and I appreciate the questions, and we'll just see where we go from it. Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mark, thank you for keeping us focused on the high density at risk going away in 2024 in your testimony. That didn't necessarily come up with our questions with the revisor. My question for you is, are you familiar with the study that the chair pointed out to on the 138% increase over the 10 years? I evidently
Not,
it's been in my folder.
It's not a study. It's actually from the KLRD. And it was provided us through Norma Volkmer, and I provided it to this committee a year ago and gave it to you. And we also had it over the interim. So Gabrielle can provide it. But I know I provided it to you personally.
I've lost more important things in my life, I'm sure of it. I'm curious in that study, though, if the Capers transfers from the Brownback area are part of that 138% increase. And without having it in front of me or having Norma here.
I would say when we look at funding trends, KSB look at funding trends, the two numbers we usually focus on are total expenditures, which would include the Capers amounts, and simply the general fund, local option budget, and special education, which would not include that. The total amount has gone up considerably higher than the other amount, partly because of Capers, partly because of building spending and those sorts of things. Okay. So so much of this is simply a matter of what base year are you looking at, and what period of time, where do you start, where do you end, and those would get different amounts.
So maybe for my own entertainment, I'll go back and I'll look for that spreadsheet spread out.
I'll find it. I'll look for you. And
then I just had an observation that on our proponents there was one written only proponent, and there were no teachers as a proponent, but the teachers, the NEA is a written opponent. So I was just pointing out that observation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Committee, any other questions? Oh, yes, Representative Estes.
Mark, in your testimony, you talk about outcomes and money. So I interpret you as you see a strong connection between the amount of money spent and outcomes.
Yes.
Okay. I looked at a list earlier today, and it's a few years old, but it had the states ranked by the state that spent the most money on education per pupil, and that was New York. Down to the very bottom of the list to Utah, who spent the least amount of money. Same list, resorted on student achievement, Utah was far higher than New York. Does that, to me, I feel like it's more important how we spend the money than how much we spend. And we have a responsibility to the parents and the children to make sure that we're spending money wisely. What's more important to you, how much we spend or how we spend it?
Obviously, you can spend a great deal of money poorly and not get good results. And if you spend less money wisely, you can get better results. So I guess I'd have to say, I think there's a balance. I think there is sort of a minimum amount necessary to do a good job. And then I think how well districts or states or whoever use those dollars is also critically important. So in my mind, I can't give you a breakdown. I do think both are important. I do think when we have, when I've tried to look at that same type of data, what I find is there is never an absolute one-to-one correlation, but generally speaking, some of the higher achieving states on multiple measures also tend to be states that tend to spend more money, not necessarily the most, and many of the states that do the least or have the lower outcomes tend to spend less. But there's all kinds of exceptions through that. I would readily acknowledge.
Okay, because I'm going down a couple of different thought paths in my head. Number one is we never pay teachers what they're worth and what they deserve. And when I've seen the funding increase, I'm still disappointed that we are not paying teachers better. And I understand that we as a legislature have very little control in that, but your membership does. And I think it's important. It's hard to do your job well when you're worried about paying your bills. And we have teachers who qualify for free and reduced lunches. And that's shameful.
May I offer a little additional comment on that? Because I've tried to look at that as well. And one other factor that is so important to looking at what teacher salaries are, well, went back a little. I was surprised a year or two ago to find out that by at least one measure, the state of Oklahoma had higher teacher salaries than Kansas. And I know they spend far less. And when I looked closely, I realized one of the biggest differences is that Oklahoma has a much higher pupil-teacher ratio. In fact, I think when I tried to do the math, it would suggest that if Kansas had Oklahoma's pupil-teacher ratio, we would have something like 4,000 fewer teachers employed. One of the places where Kansas is highest in the country is well, our low pupil-teacher ratio is, if you think that's good, which I think, and most people value that. Most people say that's important. I think most teachers would value that. But what that means is that we spread our dollars over more teachers and other staff. But when I've looked at national data, our ratios of other staff are not particularly different. We really stand out in having lots of teachers. And so that's, whether that's an issue for the legislature, the local board, or whoever, a Kansas teacher that wants to make more, perfectly understandable, needs to understand that in other states where you might make more, you may have a larger class or less help. Another thing I'll just say very quickly, I looked a few years ago because I was struck by something, and I can't remember whether it was, I think it was just looking at the number of teachers, and I believe this goes back to, let's say, around 1985, 1990. If we had the same number of teachers per population now as we did then and spent the same amount on salaries, our teacher salary would be about $80,000. It is the teachers we've added in special education. It's the teachers we've added in early childhood. It's the support staff we've added, counselors and nurses. And one of the things I saw in the testimony from the proponent talks about all the other staff we've added. Overwhelmingly, the other staff we've added are special ed paras, classroom aides, and other support staff of that nature. Good or bad, we have added a lot of staff. And so, yes, we've increased funding, and we've increased the positions to do things that I think people thought were to add programs that they hoped would be helpful. Over time, some of those have. In recent years, we haven't had the results any of us want.
And it goes back to my mind, I think we all need really tough conversations where we admit what is and isn't working, because some of this is not working, and we have to reevaluate these decisions. I mean, I'm still horrified at the discovery that there was a school that is a 1.6 proficient on math for seniors. And I just feel like we're not willing to try things that are different. We're not willing to look at how we're allocating our time. And we've got to do something different. We owe it to these children. I'm done, Madam.
All right, thank you, committee, for your questions. If we've finalized all of our questions, good job, Mark. We appreciate it. Please take note that there is written testimony. There are 4 that are listed from Judith Dede, Dina Horst, Patty Jurek, and Timothy Graham. Committee, there are no other items on our agenda. Is there anything for the good of the committee? All right, with that, we would expect a fairly full tomorrow and an extremely full Thursday. We are adjourned.